What's your thoughts on government cover-ups or covert societies attempting to control humanity? Do you believe in ancient astronauts, intergalactic communication, or extraterrestrial visitations? Ever had an experience with disembodied spirits or the paranormal universe? Are these subjects fact or fiction? Each week, Tony and Eddie explore these unbelievable realities and beyond. Exclusively on Truth Be Told.
Hello and welcome to Truth Be Told with Tony and Eddie, where we believe in experience becomes truth. I'm your host, Tony Sweet, and joining me now in studio is world-renowned psychic, Eddie Connor.
Hey, Tony.
Hey, Eddie.
Hi, everybody. Tonight we have an extraordinary guest. His name is Alan Baird, who has authored several books, including Vlad The Impaler, son of Dracul. His stories and articles have appeared in dozens of anthologies and periodicals around the world, including Playboy, PC, and in Britain's very own The Guardian and Screenwriter.
Alan grew up in New England, got a degree from Michigan State, and did his postgraduate research in West Africa. He later opened a t-shirt business in southern France, and he worked on Saturday Night Live during the Belushi years.
Oh, that's impressive.
I know. After ABC's Max Headroom series purchased his debut student film, Alan interviewed celebrities like David Bowie, Jerry Garcia, and Alice Cooper.
And Alice Cooper's perfect because it's Halloween.
Woohoo!
He designed and taught a blogging class for the University of California, and it might surprise our listening audience to know that Alan is also a licensed pilot, skydiver, scuba diver, and motorcyclist. His current day job, which is actually on the graveyard shift,
Ooh, no pun intended.
that's right, involves editing and writing scripts for the NBC News Radio Network. He lives on a small lake, very romantic, outside of Phoenix with his Hungarian wife, and together they enjoy watching the egret strut by.
By the way, Alan has asked to warn our listeners and viewers that this interview will contain descriptions of graphic, transgressive violence.
And that doesn't mean Tony without a shirt.
Hey!
So please put your hands together and welcome to Truth Be Told with Tony and Eddie, author Alan Baird.
Thank you so much, Alan, for joining Truth Be Told. How you doing, sir? How are you?
I'm good. How are you guys?
We are so excited to have you here. This is I was telling you before the show, I was like, this stuff I really like because I love history. And I think we can learn a lot from our past and, historical figures. And this one, we don't get to hear about that often. So I thought this was a perfect one, especially for around Halloween. So
Well, I'm glad you're a fan. It's always nice.
Yeah, and we don't get to use adjectives like graphic, transgressive violence.
No, not too often. Not too often. Well, first, when we have somebody on the show, we like to get to know them a little bit about what led them up to writing, the books that you have written, and especially like Vlad the Impaler. But can you tell us a little bit more about the background of what led you to start writing this type of genre?
Well, I never really wanted to be a writer. Back when I was in college, I remember, in high school even, doing book reports. I hated them. Term papers in college, hated them. And I swore to myself once I got out of college that I would never write another thing until the day I died. And, I think you might have read something about the stuff I did in Nice. I started a t-shirt business with a Danish business partner. And while I was going through that experience, I looked at it and I said, this is something that maybe in the future, if I want to call on it again, it would be nice to have some notes on this. So I filled 4 notebooks during the year I was in southern France.
Wow.
And, and it was all crap. It was all crap. And I've looked at it recently and it's still crap. But for some reason that led me into the idea of maybe start drawing on some of my own experiences and sometimes make them fictional, sometimes, do the true thing. But, get it down on paper. And eventually, after a bunch of work, stuff started becoming readable, at least, and some people actually like it. But anyway, getting into Vlad was kind of an accident, really, because I've got this friend named Sean who gets interested in lots of different things. And he will send me envelopes every few weeks, few months, whatever. And they're full of clippings. They're full of clippings and Xeroxes and God knows what. And one of these envelopes that arrived one day was full of stuff about Vlad. And he said, why don't you write something about Vlad? And I said, well, it sounds pretty violent for me. I've never really written anything like that before. And so anyway, I started looking into it, and the more I read about this guy's life, the more I realized, ooh, it's kind of a fascinating character. I mean, he's a psychotic genocidal killer, but he's fascinating. And why did he do the things he did? And, what's the historical context and all of that sort of stuff. So getting into Vlad was, I was sort of pushed into it. But once I got there, I found that, Vlad has been romanticized. I mean, ever since we got this book from Bram Stoker,
right,
back in the late 1800s, Dracula, people have, latched onto the Dracula myth and, 2 puncture holes in the neck and, maybe a kiss and maybe the vampire has shiny skin and, who knows what, but it's been a popular meme, as you well know. There have been, what did they say? Something over 200 movies made about Vlad. And as a main character, he's second only to Sherlock Holmes.
Really? Wow.
Yeah, in terms of the number of movies that have been done on him. And it struck me that, in seeing some of these movies and some of the spin-offs and some of the adaptations, that everybody is sort of skirting around the idea of the violence that he used in his reign. He, he's called Vlad the Impaler for a reason. He impaled people. And, you've got to deal with that at some point. I mean, okay, if you're going to fictionalize him and call him Count Dracula, fine, you do whatever you want. But there have been some movies made, and there are some movies in the planning stages that they try to romanticize him. I mean, there was one recently, Dracula Untold.
Yeah, I saw that.
Yeah, and it came out a couple of years ago. And, he's this tortured character in that movie. And it's almost like he's been forced into a corner to do the violent things. And you never really see, I mean, you see, the CGI effects of bats flying around or whatever, but you never really see what he did. And I think that's kind of important to make sure that the historical record is straight. Now, I wanted to write a book that was entertaining and was primarily visual. It would be nice if we could get this made into a movie, but because of the violent content, I'm not sure it ever will be. Brad Pitt, for example, he's got a production company, and he optioned a script by an actor named Charlie Hunnam, who was on Sons of Anarchy. Mm-hmm. And Hunnam wrote a script about Vlad, and I've seen some of the interviews they've done on it, and he's trying to make him into a hero, and he wasn't really. The only place that Vlad is a hero is in Romania. They see him as one of the defenders of their borders, that he kept the Ottoman Turks from sweeping in and taking over the whole place. And so they sort of forgive the violence that he perpetrated. They say that he impaled his enemies, or he impaled the Turks, whatever. But he also impaled about 100,000, I think they're talking about, of his own countrymen, the Wallachians.
Well, let me ask you this then. I want to ask you. So it says Vlad the Impaler, son of Dracul. Can you talk about who his father was a little
Oh,
bit?
sure.
That
Yeah.
would be. I'm kind of curious about that.
Yeah, and then what led him to be this way? There's always
Yeah.
something that triggers the kid when they're little. You know what I mean? It's like, I'm sure he wasn't 6 years old and go, I'm going to grow up to be the Impaler. But there's always something that, that leads to that, right?
Actually, it was probably a natural progression from him.
Mm.
His father was Vlad II. He was Vlad III. And Vlad II became, he was appointed part of the Order of the Dragon by the Emperor Sigismund, who was the King of Hungary at the time, but he was also the Holy Roman Emperor. And he created this order of knights, the Order of the Dragon, in order to defend Christianity against the Islamic horde. It's the typical Christianity against Islam.
Right.
We've never heard that one before.
Never.
but so he formed this order, and Vlad's father became a part of it. And so in the Hungarian, in the Wallachian language, dragon means is translated as Dracul. And if you're son of Dracul, you're Dracula or Dracula.
Okay.
And anyway, so Vlad's father was ruler of Wallachia for just a few years. I mean, every voivode or warlord of Wallachia ruled for a very, very short time. And Wallachia had this sort of interesting geographic importance because it was the buffer state between the Ottoman Turks and, say, Hungary, because Transylvania in those days, in fact, in the days when Bram Stoker wrote Dracula, Transylvania was Hungary. It didn't become part of Romania until after the First World War.
Oh, okay.
So, it was for hundreds and hundreds of years, it was Hungarian. And so Wallachia is between Hungary and the Ottoman Turks, two very powerful entities. And they were perforated from both sides. Attackers go through, army sweeps through from the south to the north usually, or comes back down to drive out the Turks. And so it was sort of a balancing act that Vlad II had to do. He had to, try to figure out a way to keep the Turks out of his business, and also to try to appease the Hungarians, who were his strong neighbors to the north. And at one point, he got trapped. He was abducted by the Turks, and his two of his kids were with him. Vlad was about 11 years old at the time, and his younger brother Radu was 4 or 5, something like that. Anyway, the Turks, in order to force compliance from Vlad II, kept these kids, and they kept them for 4 or 5 years, I believe. And so they grew up. Radu especially, but Vlad as well. They grew up in sort of a Turkish household, and so they saw what the Turks do. And the Turks were very fond of impaling people back in those days. That was one of the punishments, one of the, things that they did to criminals, to people they didn't like, But Vlad looked at this. I think my theory is nobody really knows why he took to impaling so seriously, but he, obviously adapted it from the Turks, and it became one of his favorite things. If you looked at Vlad the wrong way, he would impale you. One of the things that he did with his own people was he had this. He was a law and order kind of. I think Trump would have liked him. He didn't like it that there were a lot of beggars, a lot of poor, a lot of crippled people wandering the streets of Wallachia. And at one point, he said, "Okay, we're going to invite all of these people to a grand feast."
Oh
And
no.
yeah, you know what's going to
Oh
happen.
yeah.
So he gets them all in a house, and he says, everybody's getting drunk and eating lots of stuff, and he says, "How would you like to be free of all your cares
Oh Lord.
and never have a problem?" And they all said, "Yeah, yeah, yeah, that sounds great." And so he had his guards lock the doors of the place where they were having this feast and burn the place down.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, he didn't want the dregs of society in his society. He wanted to get rid of them. And one of the other problems that he was having was the boyars, who were the noble class of Wallachia. They thought that they had more power than the voivode because they got to elect voivodes every now and then. And so they were very obstreperous. They also killed his father and his older brother. And so he felt that he had to get some revenge against these people. So a lot of the boyars, the nobles, were the people that he impaled.
Wow.
Now, anyway, I
No,
sort of went off on a tangent there.
no,
Sorry
but
about that.
we're very like into the story
I
because
know.
I'm looking at Eddie like we're like wow. It's good to say though, if anybody ever invites you to a party and they say if you want to be free from all your yeah, I
There
would
are
just
so many
say
places similar to that
Yeah.
all around the country.
I would
right
just say
now.
yeah, I think I'm going to go to the car real quick. So
Yeah,
just
I need you to kiss this snake and hold this Bible.
yeah. Well, I mean that's pretty intense just listening to this. But I want to talk about the some of those other stories about him because there's has to be tons of stories that he not just impaled, but there's other stories about him invading and could you talk about some other of his conquers that he did while he was in power?
Sure. There's Because all of this happened almost 600 years ago now. He lived in the 1400s. There's a lot of secondhand material that's come down to us. A lot of it is not that reliable. A lot of it contradicts each other. There's three main sources for the material on Vlad. One of them were pamphlets published by the Germans about 20 or 30 years after his death. And because one of the peoples that he attacked were the Germans in the northern part of Wallachia, they didn't like him very much, and they wanted to smear his reputation. So they published these pamphlets that had lurid illustrations on the cover of people being impaled and Vlad sitting in the middle of them, eating his food and drinking maybe some blood that's coming down from. This is where he got the reputation as a vampire.
Hmm.
But anyway, the German pamphlets were very popular. They were reprinted several times. You have to remember that this is about the time of the development of the printing press. So, they could run these things off by the thousands. So anyway, the German pamphlets were one of the big sources of information. There were also some Russian pamphlets that were produced after that the Russians were having similar problems that Vlad had with his boyars, his nobles, and they actually sort of idolized him. They made him into more of a hero. So in their pamphlets, he was kind of a good guy. There's also, the oral tradition from the Vlachs, the people that were part of Wallachia, and there are some historical records that we have letters from him to the King of Hungary and back. But anyway, these three main sources of material, they agree only on about 9 stories. And if you want, we can get into those stories.
Yeah, let's touch on that because I love stories. So
okay. One of the first stories was the story of the Golden Cup. Now, Vlad, I told you he's kind of a law and order kind of guy, and he wanted, people to obey the laws of Wallachia, even if he wasn't around. So he put out a golden cup in the middle of, I think it's Targovist, one of his main cities, and it was by a well, and you could use the cup to drink from the well, but it was just sitting there unguarded. And the point of this story is that people were so afraid of Vlad and of getting impaled that they didn't dare to steal the golden cup. One of the next ones, I told you about the burning of the sick and poor. They, those poor guys, they just went up in smoke.
Right.
That was another one of the 9 stories. One of the ones I think that a lot of people have heard about is the one about the foreign ambassadors. Supposedly these ambassadors were from Turkey. There's a couple of them, and they were wearing their turbans. And according to the custom of their land, they never removed their turbans. So Vlad was a little offended by this. He said, everybody, when they come in the presence of the voivode, me, you take off your hats, whatever your hats are. And the Turks said, well, no, this is part of our custom. We don't do that. And so he said, well, so that those, I want to make sure that those hats never fall off your heads. Oh. So he had them nailed to their heads.
Oh my God.
Yeah. he was not a nice guy.
I was going to and that was in a good mood.
Exactly.
That was before staple guns.
Right. Oh, Lord.
Go ahead.
No, I just, what's funny, like I said, when you hear, and like I said, Hollywood always romanticizes everything. I mean, Twilight, all these vampire movies, they make everything look so romantic, and I want to be a vampire. And now you got all these people, these young kids around the country, around the world that, get fangs put in.
Yeah.
And so it really baffles me. I mean, it's fascinating. I mean, I love these movies. I love to hear the stories, but I know that behind the story that it's never always the truth. I mean, what you see on TV.
Well, and I'm curious about something, was it around the time of Anne Rice and Interview with the Vampire? Was it a little bit before that? When did it become like this super sexy vampire deliciousness, in your opinion, Alan?
Well, everything gets traced back to the novel by Bram Stoker, 1897. Now, when movies started coming in, they tried to do an adaptation. And one of the first ones was a German film and it had Count Orlok as the main guy. They tried to use the name Dracula, but they got into a copyright feud with Stoker's widow. So anyway, the first real film adaptation was done in the early 30s. And big success, huge success. And ever since that movie, it's been turned into plays, other films, little happenings, books, whatever. And, you get up to the present day when you get all of these spin-offs that are, not necessarily Dracula related, but that are vampire based.
True Blood.
And I'm sorry?
True Blood.
Exactly. Or what's the one with the shiny vampire skin?
Twilight.
Thank you. It's I don't mind people turning things into fiction, and but I see a disconcerting effort on the part of Hollywood filmmakers to get to the real story of Dracula. And they romanticize that. And, you don't want to romanticize somebody like Hitler. I mean, Hitler killed, they estimate, 10% of Germany's population. And Vlad, by most estimates, killed about 20% of Wallachia population. So you can't really make this guy into a hero. Okay, he kept the Turks out, and not really successfully, because they came in several times during his reign. But you can't make a hero out of that. I mean, the Romanians wanted to. I don't think they have a lot to draw on,
Right.
so they wanted to make a theme park called Dracula Land.
Oh,
What
Yeah.
would you do? Impale people?
you just go up to the top of the roller coaster and then you just fall off a cliff.
Yeah, right.
The main ride is horrifying.
I can't even imagine catapulting humans.
The ride of your last night.
Wow, that's unbelievable to me.
That is.
But you know what? This question, he was such a sociopath among other things, but he was such a strict rule follower person, meaning he made sure everybody followed the rules to the letter. How often did he change the rules on people?
Well, he was, very up and down. Like I say, you look at him wrong and you could be impaled.
Yeah.
We got through 2 or 3 of the stories. One of the other stories that will sort of illustrate this was there was a merchant who came into Wallachia, and he was going to do some trading. He had 160 gold florins in his pack on his horse. And so he was told, hey, this is the gold cup in the center of town. Nobody steals it. I can leave these gold coins, these gold florins, in the saddlebags on my horse. So he goes to sleep, comes back out the next morning, and the coins are gone. So he goes to Vlad and complains. And Vlad says, okay, this should not happen. You're right. People are supposed to follow the laws around here. And so he put it out to the whole town. He had it announced that if these coins were not returned to this merchant, he was going to destroy the whole town. That night.
Wow.
Yeah. That night, the coins get returned. But instead of 160, there's 161 in this guy's saddlebag. And when he comes out the next morning, he's counting through and he says, there's an extra gold coin here. What's the deal? And so he asked Vlad about it. And Vlad says, well, you're really lucky. If you hadn't reported that extra gold coin, we found the guy, by the way, who stole your gold coins, and he's going to be impaled today. But if you hadn't reported that extra gold coin, you'd be impaled right next to him.
It was a test.
Yeah,
it was a test.
It's a good thing he wasn't dyslexic.
Like I say, he was very violent, and sometimes in a very unusual way. You never really could predict what he was going to go off on. There's a story about the lazy woman. Vlad's riding down the road. He sees a guy in the fields working, and the guy's shirt is kind of short. It shows off a little bit of his stomach.
Sorry, Eddie.
So,
I said, sorry, Eddie. He wears his shirt cut off all the time.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's really it's a tube top.
Vlad would have noticed you. He calls the guy over and he says, where's your wife? What does she do? And the guy calls his wife over, and Vlad says, well, what do you do with your day? She says, well, I cook and I sew, and she's kind of terrified because she knows this guy's reputation. I cook and I sew and I clean the house. And Vlad said, well, you didn't sew his shirt very well because it's too short. And the husband, protested. He says, I wore this shirt as a joke. It's my wife. I'm very satisfied with my wife. She always takes care of me. It was just a joke that I wore this shirt. But Vlad said, well, no, the wife is guilty in this case. And he had her impaled.
Oh, my God.
Because the guy's shirt was too short. After that, he had the guy marry another woman because he said, well, you need a wife that will take care of you. So, you really couldn't predict, like I said. There's a story about a nobleman with a keen sense of smell. Do you want me to continue through these?
Yeah,
especially with the nobleman.
Yeah.
Okay. He, Vlad was doing a retaliation raid on a city where a lot of the boyars had annoyed him. And so he was impaling a whole bunch of people. And uh, at at the time this was happening, of course, when you impale people, there are smells that
Ugh.
are associated with it, bodily fluids and whatnot dripping down the poles. And so that one of the noblemen who he wasn't going to impale was holding his nose and saying, he wasn't saying anything. He was holding his nose. Vlad noticed that he was holding his nose. So he said, okay, we're going to impale this guy too, except put him on a higher pole so he doesn't have to smell all this stuff.
Oh my God. All right, I have a question now. All right, so we hear a lot about what he's done outside of the home into his I guess kingdom, if you want to call it that. But what was he like at home? Did he had a wife, a mistress, mistresses,
Fuzzy slippers.
did he sit and watch, Golden Girls? What did what did he do at home?
That would be really interesting to know. Because outside he's known as this torturer, this tormentor, this dictator. And it would be interesting if he just liked to wear a skirt and clean.
I love the image of Vlad in fuzzy
That
slippers.
would be hilarious.
It was actually two puppies, and he kicked them. I'm joking.
He just taped them to his feet.
Yeah.
What was do we know what he was more like at home?
He was married. He was married a couple of times, and we know that he had some mistresses. One of the first wife died. I think she committed suicide because they were attacked. Vlad was trying to flee. They had finally had enough of him in Wallachia, and the Turks were coming, and they were going to drive him out. So he was trying to escape. His wife said, "Oh my God, the Turks are going to capture us, and I'm going to be raped and worse." So she evidently jumped out of a window, fell thousands of feet to her death. Anyway, Vlad was captured by the Hungarians after that, and he was imprisoned in Budapest. So for 3 or 4 years, he was sort of out of circulation, but he became friendly with the Hungarian king at that time, Mátyás, and he, I guess, fell in love with a cousin of Mátyás, who was supposedly a very ugly woman. And Mátyás didn't know whether he could ever marry off this cousin, so he agreed to let Vlad marry her. And so during the later part of his imprisonment in Budapest, he was living in a house with this woman and had a couple of kids. One of the stories from that area is one night there were some robbers that came onto their property, and Vlad, goes outside with his sword, and he's going to take care of whoever's trying to rob him. There were some policemen who were chasing the robbers, and they were in the middle of Vlad's courtyard, evidently, looking for this guy. And so Vlad goes up to the policeman and chops off his head. And he couldn't. King Mátyás called him on the carpet for this. He said, well, why are you killing a policeman who's trying to catch the robber that's on your property? And Vlad said, well, he didn't ask my permission to come on the property first, so he had to die.
Oh my God. He's one you want to ask over for a party, because that you don't need a magician. You just bring him over.
So what? It almost sounds like there's this weird sexual energy with him, almost like it was titillating for him to see these people suffer while they're being impaled and stuff. There's almost a little perversion here.
Eddie, I'm glad you picked up on that. That was one of the things that I looked at, that there was a sexual element
Yes.
to a lot of what he did. The process of impalement, we'll get into a little bit of a detail here, usually in his case involved inserting a sharpened stick that wasn't too sharp. It was rounded off
Mm.
because he didn't want to kill these people immediately. He wanted them to suffer. If you put a sharp stick in somebody and it goes through a vital organ, they're going to die pretty quick. But if it's rounded off, you insert it into a woman's genitalia or a guy's anus. You can drive it all the way up to the mouth,
Oh.
and they will stay alive.
Oh my God.
Whoa.
Yeah, and sometimes it's been noted that sometimes these people stayed alive for 8 days.
Oh my God. You
while
just begged
while
to
they would
die.
be, yeah, you really want to die in that case. But anyway, because of how he chose to impale people, the method that he chose, I thought, there's got to be something sexual with this guy.
Yeah.
And he also he stripped off. He was called to judge various disputes in his kingdom. One of them was a woman who was accused of of adultery, of sleeping with another man. And so he said, well, you want somebody other than your husband to see you naked. Why don't we let the whole town see completely naked? And he had her skin stripped off.
Oh, Jesus.
And while she was, displayed for many hours before she died, anyway, he got to the heart of sexuality, but it wasn't a normal. I mean, what most people consider normal sexuality. It was very much tied up with violence and tied up with wanting people to suffer. So, the idea that I put forth in the book is that, yeah, he's got a psychosexual problem.
It sounds
And
like it.
yeah.
Have you been back to that territory? Have you visited the areas where he ruled at?
Is his castle still there?
There, a lot of people say Castle Bran is the castle of choice. They say, okay, this is Dracula's castle. And it's very picturesque. It looks like something out of the movies. In fact, it was used in one of the early 1940s movies, I believe, as Dracula's castle. They shot on location. But his castles they're in ruins now. There's two of them. There's one that's in the center of the city. There's another one that's on a mountaintop that you have to climb a long way. By the way, I haven't been there. I've only heard descriptions of them. But you have to climb a long way to get up to this castle. And once you get up there, it's just basically a pile of rocks. But what they were going to do with this Dracula land is they were going to restore, these castles, the one in the city and the one on the top of the mountain, and try to bring them back to the way they were before. So, there was a little bit of good in what they were trying to do. It's just they were trying to glorify this guy who killed a lot of people.
I wonder. Oh, go ahead, Eddie.
No, I think it's fascinating, and I see this a lot. I actually saw this in my dad. My dad was pretty much a sadist, and he would do these horrible things to people he claimed he loved. And then when he was caught by the police department doing it, then the police department sort of returned the favor. They locked the elevator between floors and just sort of had their way with him, as it were, with the billy sticks and stuff like that. And then the next day when my mom went down to see him, he was crying. And, he was all busted up in the face. I mean, they beat him up with billy sticks. About 6 or 8 cops did. And he was always just like a devil to us. And he was terrifying. But here's this grown man crying like a little baby because of what someone did to him, but he had no remorse
Of what he did to
at
somebody
what
else.
he did to Mom and us. And so I'm seeing the same pattern here with this man where he's like, we have to flee because they could rape me or worse. And I'm like, it's called karma, bitch. You just strap yourself in with a tub of Crisco and get ready.
During his lifetime, the Ottoman Turks had a name for him. They were the first ones actually who put the money on the nose. They call him Kaziglu Bey, which translates to Impaler Prince. But he didn't get that nickname in the West. He didn't get the nickname Vlad the Impaler or Vlad Cepes, which it is in Wallachia, until about 30 years after his death in the West. But the Turks, they knew him for what he was. They at one point the Turks were sweeping into Wallachia, as they were in the habit of doing in those days, and they were stopped on the road outside the capital by a forest of 20,000 impaled bodies.
Oh my God.
Now, some of them were Turks that were being punished, but most of them were Wallachians. And they asked him why he did this, and he said, "Well, I had to do this. I had to impress the Turks with what I was willing to do to my own people."
Oh, wow.
To dissuade them from coming in and attacking. And it worked. The Ottoman Turks turned around and went home, but 20,000 people on stakes. Can you imagine?
I'm sure you understand energy and everything just based on like the whole mood of the interview and then how grim this person is. You couldn't pay me. I would for not $1 million, and I'm not exaggerating this. You could not pay me $1 million to go back to that area as an intuitive.
I was going to ask that you ask you that,
because
Eddie.
ghosts are birthed out of horrific traumatic death. So there's a bunch of suffering souls trapped between worlds roaming that whole area by the thousands. And not only would you not get a good night's sleep, you couldn't pay me money enough to go back there, knowing what I know now.
Well, the whole vampire tradition is sort of centered in this area. Transylvania is famous for this. But vampires are, still part of the cultural tradition there, even to this day. When I was doing research on this book, somebody sent me a newspaper article from 2004. And it was these villagers who were convinced that this guy who had died was coming back as a vampire. And so they dug him up.
Oh.
They dug him up. They cut out his heart.
Oh my God.
They cooked it up, and they all shared eating it. Evidently,
Ew.
this was part of the,
They had me up to that point.
how we get rid of this guy. It's not always a stake through the heart. Sometimes you cut up the heart and eat it too. But this is in 2004.
No, Nostradamus made one of his most famous predictions was that it was something, and I'm paraphrasing this, that 200 years after my death, he listed the date and the time, my body will be dug up. Someone will drink wine from my skull, and that person will be shot. 200 years to the day, there's two grave robbers. They go to his grave. They dig it up in the middle of the night. They take water and rinse out his skull because he's now bones, and then pour wine in his skull. Drink the wine, and while he's drinking the wine from the skull, the guard at the graveyard shot him in the head and killed him.
Wow.
So it's like it's so fascinating and weird to me that people up until 2004 will go and do things like this. Dig up newsflash, if you think they're coming to haunt you as a vampire, don't eat their heart because now you're part of the problem.
Ooh. maybe you should go over there and tell them that.
I'll just do it from Skype.
Yeah, it's like, yeah, we'll do. So we only have about 4 minutes left, and see, this hour went fast, and
I thought it was going to drag.
no, please, no, and
That's been very helpful. Thank you.
oh no, you're the one that's doing all the work here. I mean, you're doing a great job. But I want to know about. We've all heard about Count Dracula, but what about Countess Dracula?
Ooh, yes.
Yeah, she lived about 100. She was a Hungarian noblewoman who lived about 100 years after Vlad. And the only reason that she's connected with his name is because she was on trial for killing young girls and bathing in their blood.
Oh, wow.
And the numbers range from 30 girls to 650.
Oh my God.
I mean,
Talk about a mass murder.
yeah, her name was Elizabeth Bathory, and she lived from 1560 to 1614. She was active in doing these killings for about 20 years before they caught her and said, "No, you can't do this." And then they locked her up in a room for 4 or 5 years until she died. But yeah, she thought she could keep her youth by bathing in the blood of young virgins.
And where do you get these ideas? And then where do you have the audacity to implement it once you get the idea?
There must have been some dark magic or something around that.
Yeah.
It had to have been.
That's scary.
Yeah, dark, very dark. Oh, there's one thing I want to get to before we go. Prince Charles.
Yes.
Yes, you know about this one.
I do.
Prince Charles is very proud of the fact that he's descended from Vlad the Impaler.
I did not know that.
My goodness.
In fact, he's bought a couple of houses in northern Transylvania. He's very much into the idea of preserving traditional ways of life and all of that. He's bought these houses, which you can rent out as like a bed and breakfast.
Eddie, you want to go?
Nope.
They have a resident ecologist just to make sure that you don't treat the environment badly around there.
Wow.
Yeah,
I want to go.
that's your next vacation.
I know, right?
Well, it'll be a staycation. I'll be at Motel 6, and I'll leave the light on for you. But I feel like you should really, really, really pitch this to HBO or pay-per-view, honestly, Alan, because, then split screen some aspects of it worse. Like, this is who you think your shiny, little, friendly, sexy vampire is, child, and he is Vlad the Impaler. You do the math. I mean, to compare the two, I think it needs to be a pay-per-view series, at least 8 in the series, because they're really doing the mini-series now. And it could be documentary style, like a docu-follow. And then, you got to throw some people in there, not me, but other psychics and mediums in that area, and ask them what they're picking up on, and don't tell them anything till you drop their ass on Survival Dracula Island and let them figure out what's going to happen.
They're like,
Eddie, you can produce.
Okay, I would do that from a distance.
Yeah, right.
Okay.
Just call me when you need
Call
me.
it in, right?
Yeah,
Yes,
call me
sir.
when you need.
Yes, sir.
Well, we thank you so much, Alan. This has been
Thank you for
so
having
much fun, and this is really the beginning of our paranormal month for celebrating Halloween, and this was a perfect way to start.
Yes.
And you can go to Alan's Facebook page. Just go to Vlad T. Is it T.I.?
Yeah.
VLAD.
The Impaler. Yeah.
Yeah. The Impaler. So if you want to pick up his books, Amazon, I'm sure is there any other locations that we can pick it up at?
Oh, you can get it everywhere. You can get it at Barnes & Noble. You can get it on Smashwords, and it's free.
It's free?
It's free.
Ow.
Yes.
Well, for somebody who doesn't like to write, that's very generous.
I know.
I'm just trying to get it out there. Hopefully somebody will pick up on the idea and say, this will make a good movie.
No, it's a good one. I mean, it's. I learned a lot I did not know, and I probably won't sleep for a week. So thank you.
Right.
I'm sorry, Eddie.
Yeah, I tell you, I'm going to suffer through. I'll be like Alan.
Right.
Thank you.
Write my name in blood on a wall somewhere.
And then bathe in it.
Oh God.
I'll be impaling myself and writing my name in blood. I'll be like red rum, red rum. What's Eddie spelled backwards?
Eddie.
Oh, Eddie.
I think that's what it is. All right, Alan. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
We'll have you back again. Any other books coming out soon for you?
Oh, there's a lot of them out there, but you can find them on the Vlad page.
Awesome.
Perfect.
Thank you,
All
sir.
right. Alan Baird, everybody, we want to appreciate you. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we have
Stephen Lancaster.
and so we have more paranormal stuff to talk about, and we want to scare the hell out of you, and I hope Alan did that for you.
He did it for me.
All right, we're going to be back in just a minute. Don't go anywhere. Truth Be Told with Tony and Eddie. I'm Tony Sweet.
I'm Eddie Connor.
And we'll be right back.
Bye, y'all. Hi, everybody,
Bye-bye.
and thank you for listening to Truth Be Told with Tony and Eddie right here on ubnradio.com, Channel 1. Make sure you go to the iTunes channel and subscribe there to the show. Listen to us on iHeartRadio, and don't forget to subscribe on our YouTube channel, which is Truth Be Told. That's the Truth Be Told page on the YouTube channel. Check us out there. We've got lots of videos, lots of podcasts, and lots of things where we're probably acting silly. So every Friday, 4 p.m. Pacific time, right here on ubnradio.com. Check Tony and I out on Truth Be Told with Tony and Eddie.